Hello again, River family. I get to be here again with my beautiful wife. We're going to talk a little bit more about what she talked about on Sunday. Today we want to talk about a little bit the gardener being God and how tending the garden is labor, which is something you said that I thought was really good. And I think the vine and the branches is used a lot. The idea of pruning is said a lot, like in Christianese, Christian worlds, right? But like, what does it actually mean if I'm a garden, right, in this analogy, and God is a gardener? What does that like look like on a day-to-day basis? What does that mean, like not just as a symbol, but what does that really mean that God is doing to me and in me and through me?
It means nudging in places that I'm uncomfortable. It means being uncomfortable. It means looking within yourself as the Lord prompts you to do and recognizing weeds.
What are weeds then? Like, what's the difference between a weed and something I want growing in my garden?
Ultimately, that's up to him, right? Ultimately,
True.
because it's going to be different for every person, widely and also not, in the sense that there are specifics that across the board are for no one.
True. Yeah.
No one should have this growing in their life. But for at large, we'll say that that's fully up to God. And so it looks like him pointing out coping mechanisms, or the way that we communicate to our spouse or kids, or what we are doing with our time that creates a conversation between the two of us. He's never going to say, like, I won't say that. I haven't had conversations with God in my life where he says, cold turkey, we're done with this. But he does start having conversations with me that end there.
Yeah.
Right? Like, he'll point out something to me and then point out how it makes me feel. Like, see how you're doing this. See how those later feelings follow. Maybe that's not good. What do you think? And it's a conversation. So to me, that's what like the surrendering yourself to a gardener looks like, is giving the Lord permission to have those conversations with you.
I think that a big part of that is being willing to be uncomfortable, because no one likes to be told like, hey, this is probably unhealthy, or often we know the things that are unhealthy in our life. We just don't want to talk about or address them or look at. We want to just pretend the weeds aren't there, or put a big bush in front of them and they'll hide behind the bush. And no one will know they're there, right? And it's like God wants to tend the entire garden, because the life of all of it affects all of it, so to speak.
Yeah, and I mean, we are in a tough culture that accepts everything, and then you saying any statement of this isn't right for me is religious. So it's a tender moment, I would say, for our society, where it's like, whatever makes you feel good, do that. And if someone in your community says like, hey, I don't think that's right, you're canceled. So that is a little bit sticky in this current culture, but the Lord has stayed the same forever. His standard hasn't changed, and what he wants to say to you and through you is valuable. And so we don't have to. You can do whatever you want, but
the opportunity
you have the opportunity to be loved by God. And being loved means that I'm going to be compelled by his love to love him back. And part of loving him back does look like obeying, and does look like surrendering yourself.
Amen. I like that. So you have the opportunity to be intentional, right? To allow God to garden you, to affect you, to change you, which means opening up the areas that are tender, that you want to keep in the dark, that you're not so happy for people to see. And sometimes we get stuck in like, I want to present my best to God. And it's like, no, he wants all of you specifically so that he can deal with the things that aren't your best, because he has better for you.
Exactly.
He doesn't just rip out weeds and say, well, that was painful, right? Like the weeds are always replaced with something that is life-giving as well.
Amen.
He doesn't just say, remove this thing. He says, but I have this instead. And that part where it's like, we always pray about like, okay, if I give something up to God, if I lay something at the altar, if I lay it down at the cross, then we ask Jesus, like, what do you have for me in return? And so like that's true in your garden as well. Like that there's always part of your life, your heart, your mind, when something is removed, he has something new.